The integral perfection, a divine perfection of the human being, is our aim. We must know then, first, what are the essential elements that constitute man's total perfection. Secondly, what we mean by divine as distinguished from a human perfection of our being. That man as a being is capable of self development and of some approach at least to an ideal standard of perfection, which his mind is able to conceive, fix before it, and pursue, is common ground to all thinking humanity, though it may be only the minority who concern themselves with this possibility as providing the one most important aim of life. But by some, the ideal is conceived as a mundane change, by others as a religious conversion. The mundane perfection is sometimes conceived of as something outward, social, a thing of action, a more rational dealing with our fellow men and our environment, a better and more efficient citizenship and discharge of duties, a better, richer, kindlier, and happier way of living, with a more just and more harmonious associated enjoyment of the opportunities of existence. By others, again, a more inner and subjective ideal is cherished, a clarifying and raising of the intelligence, will, and reason, a heightening and ordering of power and capacity in the nature, a nobler ethical, a richer aesthetic, a finer emotional, a much healthier and better governed vital and physical being. Sometimes one element is stressed almost to the exclusion of the rest. Sometimes, in wider and more well balanced minds, the whole harmony is envisaged as a total perfection. A change of education and social institutions is the outward means adopted, or an inner self training and development is preferred as the true instrumentation. Or the two aims may be clearly united, the perfection of the inner individual, the perfection of the outer living. But the mundane aim takes for its field the present life and its opportunities. The religious aim, on the contrary, fixes before it the self-preparation for another existence after death. Its commonest ideal is some kind of pure sainthood. It means a conversion of the imperfect or sinful human being by divine grace or through obedience to a law laid down by a scripture or else given by a religious founder. The aim of religion may include a social change, but it is then a change brought about by the acceptance of a common religious ideal and way of consecrated living, a brotherhood of the saints, a theocracy or kingdom of God, reflecting on earth the kingdom of heaven. The object of our synthetic yoga must, in this respect too, as in its other parts, be more integral and comprehensive, embrace all these elements or these tendencies of a larger impulse of self-perfection and harmonize them, or rather unify. And in order to do that successfully, it must siege on a truth which is wider than the ordinary religious and higher than the mundane principle. Old life is a secret yoga, an obscure growth of nature towards the discovery and fulfillment of the divine principle hidden in her, which becomes progressively less obscure, more self conscient and luminous, more self possessed in the human being by the opening of all his instruments of knowledge, will, action, life to the spirit within him and in the world. Mind, life, body, all the forms of our nature are the means of this growth, but they find their last perfection only by opening out to something beyond them. First, because they are not the whole of what man is. Secondly, because that other something which he is the key of his completeness and brings a light which discovers to him the whole high and large reality of his being. Mind is fulfilled by a greater knowledge of which it is only a half light. Life discovers its meaning in a greater power and will, of which it is the outward and as yet obscure functioning. Body finds its last use as an instrument of a power of being, of which it is a physical support and material starting point. They have all themselves first to be developed and find out their ordinary possibilities. All our normal life is a trying of these possibilities and an opportunity for this preparatory and tentative self-training. But life cannot find its perfect self-fulfillment till it opens to that greater reality of being, of which by this development of a richer power and a more sensitive use and capacity, it becomes a well-prepared field of working. Intellectual, volitional, ethical, emotional, aesthetic, and physical training and improvement are all so much to the good, but they are only in the end a constant movement in a circle without any last delivering and illumining aim, unless they arrive at a point when they can open themselves to the power and presence of the Spirit and admit its direct workings. This direct working affects a conversion of the whole being, which is the indispensable condition of our real perfection. To grow into the truth and power of the Spirit, and by the direct action of that power to be made a fit channel of its self-expression, a living of man in the divine, and a divine living of the Spirit in humanity, will therefore be the principle and the whole object of an integrated yoga of self-perfection. In the process of this change, there must be, by the very necessity of the effort, two stages of its working. First, there will be the personal endeavor of the human being. As soon as he becomes aware by his soul, mind, heart of this divine possibility and turns towards it as the true object of life, to prepare himself for it and to get rid of all in him that belongs to a lower working, of all that stands in the way of his opening to the spiritual truth and its power, so as to possess by this liberation his spiritual being and turn all his natural movements into free means of its self-expression. It is by this turn that the self-conscious yoga, aware of its aim, begins. There is a new awakening and an upward change of the life motive. So long as there is only an intellectual, ethical, and other self training for the new normal purposes of life, which does not travel beyond the ordinary circle of working of mind, life, and body, we are still only in the obscure and yet unillumined preparatory yoga of nature. We are still in pursuit of only an ordinary human perfection. A spiritual desire of the divine and of the divine perfection, of a unity with Him in all our being, and a spiritual perfection in all our nature is the effective sign of this change, the precursory power of a great integral conversion of our being and living. By personal effort, a precursory change, a preliminary conversion can be effected. It amounts to a greater or less spiritualizing of our mental motives, our character and temperament, and a mastery, stealing or changed action of the vital and physical life. This converted subjectivity can be made the base of some communion or unity of the soul in mind with the divine, and some partial reflection of the divine nature in the mentality of the human being. That is, as far as man can go by his unaided or indirect aided effort, because that is an effort of mind, and mind cannot climb beyond itself permanently. At most, it arises to a spiritualized and idealized mentality. If it shoots up beyond that border, it loses hold of itself, loses hold of life, and arrives either at a trance of absorption or a passivity. A greater perfection can only be arrived at by a higher power entering in and taking up the whole action of the being. The second stage of this yoga will therefore be a persistent giving up of all the action of the nature into the hands of this greater power, a substitution of its influence, possession and working for the personal effort, until the divine to whom we aspire becomes the direct master of the yoga and effects the entire spiritual and ideal conversion of the being. This double character of our yoga raises it beyond the mundane ideal of perfection, while at the same time it goes too beyond the loftier, intenser, but much narrower religious formula. The mundane ideal regards man always as a mental, vital, and physical being, and it aims at a human perfection well within these limits, a perfection of mind, life, and body, an expansion and refinement of the intellect and knowledge, of the will and power, of ethical character, aim, and conduct, of aesthetic sensibility and creativeness, of emotional balanced poise and enjoyment, of vital and physical soundness, regulated action, and just efficiency. It is a wide and full aim, but yet not sufficiently full and wide, because it ignores that other greater element of our being, which the mind vaguely conceives as the spiritual element and leaves it either undeveloped or insufficiently satisfied as merely some high occasional or added derivatory experience, the result of the action of mind in its exceptional aspects, or dependent upon mind for its presence, and persistence. It can become a high aim when it seeks to develop the loftier and the larger reaches of our mentality, but yet not sufficiently high because it does not aspire beyond mind to that of which our purest reason, our brightest mental intuition, our deepest mental sense and feeling, strongest mental will and power, or ideal aim and purpose are only pale radiations. Its aim, besides, is limited to a terrestrial perfection of the normal human life. A yoga of integral perfection regards man as a divine spiritual being involved in mind, life, and body. It aims therefore at a liberation and a perfection of his divine nature. It seeks to make an inner living in the perfectly developed spiritual being, his constant intrinsic living, and the spiritualized action of mind, life, and body, only its outward human expression. In order that this spiritual being may not be something vague and indefinable, or else but imperfectly realized and dependent on the mental support and the mental limitations, it seeks to go beyond mind to the supramental knowledge, will, sense, feeling, intuition, dynamic initiation of vital and physical action, all that makes the native working of the spiritual being. It accepts human life, but takes account of the large supra-terrestrial action behind the earthly material living, and it joins itself to the divine being, from whom the supreme origination of all these partial and lower states proceeds, so that the whole of life may become aware of its divine source and feel in each action of knowledge, of will, of feeling, sense, and body the divine originating impulse. It rejects nothing that is essential in the mundane aim, but enlarges it, finds and lives in its greater and its truer meaning, now hidden from it, transfigures it from a limited, earthly, and mortal thing to a figure of intimate, divine, and immortal values. The integral yoga meets the religious ideal at several points, but goes beyond it in the sense of a greater wideness. The religious ideal looks not only beyond this earth, but away from it to a heaven, or even beyond all heavens to some kind of nirvana. Its ideal of perfection is limited to whatever kind of inner or outer mutation will eventually serve the turning away of the soul from the human life to the beyond. Its ordinary idea of perfection is a religio-ethical change, a drastic purification of the active and the emotional being, often with an ascetic abrogation and rejection of the vital impulses as its completest reaching of excellence, and in any case, a supra-terrestrial motive and reward or result of a life of pity and right conduct. Insofar as it admits a change of knowledge, will, aesthesis, it is in the sense of the turning of them to another object than the aims of human life, and eventually brings a rejection of all earthly objects of aesthesis, will, and knowledge. The method, whether it lays stress on personal effort or upon divine influence, on works and knowledge or upon grace, is not like the mundane, a development, but rather a conversion. But in the end, the aim is not a conversion of our mental and physical nature, but the putting on of a pure spiritual nature and being. And since that is not possible here on earth, it looks for its consummation by a transference to another world or a shuffling off of old cosmic existence. But the integral yoga founds itself on a conception of the spiritual being as an omnipotent existence, the fullness of which comes not essentially by a transference to other worlds or a cosmic self-extinction, but by a growth out of what we now are phenomenally into the consciousness of the omnipresent reality which we always are in the essence of our being. It substitutes for the form of religious piety its completer spiritual seeking of a divine union. It proceeds by a personal effort to a conversion through a divine influence and possession. But this divine grace, if we may so call it, is not simply a mysterious flow or touch coming from above, but the all-pervading act of a divine presence which we come to know within as the power of the highest self and master of our being, entering into the soul and so possessing it that we not only feel it close to us and pressing upon our mortal nature, but live in its law, know that law, possess it as a whole power of our spiritualized nature. The conversion its action will effect is an integral conversion of our ethical being into the truth and right of the divine nature, of our intellectual into the illumination of divine knowledge, our emotional into the divine love and unity, our dynamic and volitional into a working of the divine power, our aesthetic into a plenary reception and a creative enjoyment of divine beauty, not excluding even in the end a divine conversion of the vital and physical being. It regards all the previous life as an involuntary and unconscious or half-conscious preparatory growing towards this change, and yoga as the voluntary and conscious effort and realization of the change by which all the aim of human existence in all its parts is fulfilled, even while it is transfigured. Admitting the supracosmic truth and life in worlds beyond, it admits too the terrestrial as a continued term of the one existence and a change of individual and communal life on earth as a strain of its divine meaning. To open oneself to the supracosmic divine is an essential condition of this integral perfection. To unite oneself with the universal divine is another essential condition. Here, the yoga of self-perfection coincides with the yoga of knowledge, works, and devotion. For it is impossible to change the human nature into the divine or to make it an instrument of the divine knowledge, will, and joy of existence unless there is a union with the Supreme Being, consciousness, and bliss, and a unity with its universal self in all things and beings. A wholly separative possession of the divine nature by the human individual, as distinct from a self-withdrawn absorption in it, is not possible. But this unity will not be an inmost spiritual oneness qualified, so long as the human life lasts, by a separative existence in mind, life, and body. The full perfection is a possession through this spiritual unity, of unity too with the universal mind, the universal life, the universal form, which are the other constant terms of cosmic being. Moreover, since human life is still accepted as a self expression of the realized divine in man, there must be an action of the entire divine nature in our life. And this brings in the need of the supramental conversion, which substitutes the native action of spiritual being for the imperfect action of the superficial nature, and spiritualizes and transfigures its mental, vital, and physical parts by the spiritual ideality. These three elements are union with the Supreme Divine, unity with the universal self, and a supramental life action from this transcendent origin and through this universality, but still with the individual as the sole channel and natural instrument, constitute the essence of the integral divine perfection of the human being.